Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today we're going to take a look at the guns of Black Hawk Down. Actually, we're going to take a look at one of the guns in Black Hawk Down, and it is First Sergeant Shughart's M14. This is a clone, of course, but you might have been clicking on this video expecting that I was going to give a whole rundown of problems with the representation of the guns in this film, as I've done on a couple of previous occasions with other movies. However, when it comes to the presentation of firearms, as well as most other things, Black Hawk Down is a really well done film. Yes, there are some historical, not quite right elements to it. It is, after all, trying to compress like an 18-hour battle with 400 plus people into a 2-hour movie with a couple dozen people. But when it comes to the firearms, they did a really good job. The standard service weapons that the Americans use are pretty much bang on. The weapons that the Somalis were using are pretty much bang on. The only place where there are a few issues are when it comes to the weapons used by the Delta Force operatives. And that's because the Delta Force guys had a lot of flexibility to customize their own weapons. And the biggest single thing that the prop department did wrong in Black Hawk Down was to use optics that weren't actually available in 1993 when the events of the movie took place. So we're going to take a closer look at this clone of Shughart's M14 and explain what he was actually carrying during Operation Gothic Serpent. And the biggest thing is this optic on top. All right, I'm not going to get into all the details of Black Hawk Down. If you haven't seen it, just go watch the movie. It's a fantastic movie. But what makes this rifle interesting, particularly interesting here, is it's the only M14 that's shown in the movie, and it's probably close to the only M14 that was actually in theater in Somalia at the time with U.S. Task Force Ranger at all. And the only reason it's there is because it was being carried by one of the Delta Force operators, First Sergeant Randy Shughart, and Delta Force had a tremendous amount of latitude in their weaponry. They could essentially carry whatever they each individually thought was best. And so you see a lot of forward-thinking elements in the guns that they carried. And there have been a tremendous number of clones of various Delta Force carbines from the 1990s made. They were the guys who were going in with early aim points, with lasers, with flashlights, mounting all sorts of extra stuff on their guns to make use of. In fact, I have a video myself that I did with Larry Vickers on the Colt 723 carbine that he used scud hunting. So I'll link to that in the description below. But Randy Shughart liked 7.62 NATO. He wanted the more powerful cartridge, and so he opted for an M14. Now, why an M14? There are some people who will look at this and say, his use of this proves that the M14 is a fantastic rifle. Well, in reality, the M14 was the only option. If you wanted a shoulder rifle in 7.62 NATO in the 1990s in the US military ecosystem, if you wanted it semi-auto, it was this. Or like an M21 that had been bedded and built up and had a magnified optic on it. But if you want 7.62 NATO, and Shughart did, you took an M14 out of stores. So that's what he did. He then applied sort of the same sort of modifications to it that most of the other Delta guys did to their CAR-15s, their short-barreled ARs. So he put on an Aimpoint mount, or an Aimpoint optic. The mount is sort of the standard mount that was used for the sniper versions of the M14, the M21, the XM25 rifles. But he put on an Aimpoint, which was a non-magnified red dot. It's the same sort of thing that the Delta guys were using on CAR-15s. Now, in the movie, they show this with a CompM2 Aimpoint, and that's the biggest single flaw of the prop layout in the movie, and you can see it here. The issue is that CompM4 didn't exist when the events of Black Hawk Down took place. It was introduced a couple years later in, I believe, 1995. The movie takes place in 1993. So what was the correct optic? Well, we don't actually know. It's either an Aimpoint 3000 or an Aimpoint 5000. All right, let me show you the difference between the Aimpoint 3000 and the 5000. So this is a 3000. This is a 5000. These were introduced in 1989. The 5000 was introduced in 1991. They're both technically available when the events of Black Hawk Down take place, but we know that Delta had procured Aimpoint 3000s, and even being released in 91, it's a relatively compact time frame to have Aimpoint 5000s get into Delta inventory. Is it possible? Yes, absolutely possible. But If we have to pick between one of the two, it seems the more likely of the two optics to be used was the 3000. So what's the difference between them? Primarily, it's the tube diameter. The Aimpoint 3000 has a 1-inch in diameter tube. That's, of course, 25.4 millimeters. The Aimpoint 5000 has a 30 millimeter tube. Other than that, they're virtually identical. There's a rubber protective end cap on this one, but you have the same battery system up here, you have the same zeroing. Really, the only way to distinguish between these two optics in pictures, where it's almost impossible to tell the difference between the tube diameter, is by this square section at the top of the Aimpoint 3000 battery housing. So you can see it's a round thing here with a square top on it. On the 5000, it goes all the way up. There isn't this seam right there. So if you want to dig into some vintage photos of Delta Force operators, this is something you can look for, but I have never found an actual picture of Shughart's rifle, so we kind of have to just guess on which optic he was probably using. So I went with the 3000. I think that's the more likely of the two optics here. Now, the other thing that is missed in the film is this clunky thing up front, and that is an AIM-1 infrared laser. So what is the AIM-1 laser? Well, this specifically is an AIM-1D. There were a couple other different variations of these, but they're all basically the same technology. It is an infrared aiming laser. It was developed and manufactured by a company called International Products out of Israel. They're a little clunky. They attach using a 1/4-20 threaded hole right here. 1/4-20 is cool. That's like the standard thread pitch for tripod mounts, for camera mounts. It's a very common thread pitch to find. There are no really good integrated mounts for these things, though. Like, this predates the use of Picatinny rails. You'll find a variety, if you look into these, of kind of weird kludgy mounts used to put them on AR-15 carry handles, on barrels, that sort of thing. So that's the actual laser emitting area right there. This is powered by a pair of AA batteries, so actually pretty easy to run. Open that up, you got your two AA's in there, and it conveniently tells you which direction to put them in. There is a switch here on the side, so we can turn this to low and high power, just like manual off on, and then there is a low-high remote. This plug connector right here allows you to attach a pressure pad switch, like I have on the rifle, like Shughart almost certainly had on his rifle. And so then you can turn it to one of these two settings, and then pressing the pressure pad will turn it on. These are pretty rare today. They seem to have gone out of favor about as quickly as they came into favor. By the way, these two screws are your zeroing adjustments, so you can, in fact, zero the laser. Probably the most common place to find them these days are a few imports coming in from Turkey, because I believe the Turkish military used them and surplused them off not long ago. So they are a little bit more available now than they have been in years previously, but still pretty scarce to find. There are pictures out there of Delta Force guys, and you can see these AIM-1 lasers of various types on their CAR-15s. We don't have any picture of one on Shughart's rifle. We don't actually have any picture that I'm aware of Shughart's M14. There is a painting that was done after the fact by a painter who was pretty well familiar with Shughart and Gordon and the Delta Force operators who were in Mogadishu, and it does show that AIM-1 laser on Shughart's rifle. Now, it shows it mounted to the bottom of the stock. I mounted this one out on the gas block. I can't tell you exactly how Shughart mounted it himself. A lot of these mounts were pretty jerry-rigged at the time. And of course, Shughart's rifle, like his counterpart Gordon's, has never been recovered. It disappeared in Mogadishu that day, so we don't know. But this is what he would have used for aiming at night with night vision goggles. Now, it's, I think, important to recognize that the mission profile had Gordon Shughart and Brad Halling on this helicopter as fire support. They weren't intending to go in on the ground in Mogadishu that day. And so this sort of setup, which seems pretty clunky for like a close quarters fight in a narrow alley around a bunch of shacks with a huge number of opponents, like if you're going into that situation, would you take an M14 that's pretty long, that has limited magazine capacity and has some clunky stuff like this hanging off of it? Yeah, you probably wouldn't. You'd probably take something more like one of the CAR-15s. We'll never know if Shughart would have made that choice differently had he known what he was going to get into, but by the time the situation developed, and he was already on site, this is the rifle he had, and so this is the rifle that he used. All right, so let's wrap this up. Our grandiose tally of problems with the guns in Black Hawk Down, it's essentially they put the wrong aim point on this M14 and on some of the Delta Force CAR-15s. That's pretty much it. Yeah, there's also the lack of having this AIM-1 laser out on the M14, and frankly, we would have, in reality, some of the other Delta Force guys with CAR-15s, they also would have had AIM-1 lasers on their CAR-15s. We don't see those. This is kind of unfortunate. I mean, it's a really nitpicky difference, and of course, the CompM2s that they used in the movie were totally readily available at the time, much more so than these guys. The AIM-1 lasers were not readily available at all at that time, and frankly, we don't see Delta Force using infrared stuff at all, so it's an easy thing to omit, and to me, really not that big a deal. But I think it's really cool to understand what the rifle that Shughart had would have originally looked like. And it's been a really cool process to assemble this rifle together, knowing everything that went into it, and knowing that this is a functional copy of a rifle that was directly involved in a Medal of Honor action. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. I certainly did, and like I said, I'm going to be taking this out to do some shooting with, because yeah, intellectually, I know all of the problems with the M14 as a service rifle, and none of them make this thing any less awesome to me. So hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.